Does one little comet have a big role to play in the book of Revelation? We'll find out together if it's a big star or a bit player in God's story of the sky. Grab your popcorn. This is episode 1 of the Celestial Tapestry. Hi, I'm Matt, and for the next several episodes, I'll be your tour guide as we take a look at the celestial tapestry God placed in the sky. What is a celestial tapestry? Well, a tapestry is sort of like a woven mural that tells a story from one side to another. It's a picture story. Sometimes they show one event, but often they tell a story that spans a considerable amount of time. God placed one in the sky for us to see. He even tells us about it in the Bible. We'll get to that in a second. Before we go any further, though, let's get some stuff out of the way. We're going to be looking at stars and things in the sky, and we're going to be seeing some symbolism there. Wait, you yell, isn't that astrology? You can relax. The answer is no. Astrology is the belief that stars and planets and the heavenly bodies and stuff in the sky somehow control our destiny and influence us in some supernatural way. We are in no way claiming that, not at all. None of it has any power over anything. We're going to be looking at the sky as a giant clock that God set in motion at creation. In fact, God tells us that He put the sun, moon, and stars in the sky as signs for us. Let's take a look at the creation account in Genesis 1:14. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. So we see God place the lights in the sky for several different reasons. One is to act as a giant celestial clock, but another of those reasons is specifically to mark out signs to us. Let's look and see what Jesus had to say about it in Luke 21:25. Here he's talking about His return to earth at the end of the age. He says something similar in Matthew and in Mark. Here's what he says in Luke's account. "And there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and on the earth distress of nations and perplexity because of the roaring of the sea and of the waves, people fainting with fear and with foreboding of what is coming on the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken." And let's not forget the most obvious account of signs in the sky, the Star of Bethlehem. These guys were so sure of what they were seeing that they made a trip of hundreds or even thousands of miles to worship the newborn Messiah. And the kicker? They weren't wrong. Here's Matthew's account of the Magi. "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him.'" Ancient people watched the skies a lot. The Jews based their calendar and holy days on the cycles of the moon. But God makes it clear in Deuteronomy and in other places that they aren't to worship the sky or the created things in it. The sky is God's creation. It doesn't have any power over us. It's just a giant clock. It just marks off time like hands and numbers on a clock face. Okay, another quick disclaimer here. We're talking comets and Messiah and a bunch of stuff that sounds sort of out there. I want to take a second to clearly say that we're not making any sort of claims about a rapture or anything else. Let me say it again so we're clear. We are not predicting the rapture. The goal of these videos is simply to share with you some of the amazing things happening in the sky over the next handful of years, and they seem to share some similarities with biblical text. The sky does what it does, and the scriptures say what they say, and the two seem to be similar. Got it? All right. If you're not already familiar with the stars and how they look as we pass them every night, this journey is going to get a little confusing. So let's do a super quick astronomy crash course to make sure we have a handle on it. Every 365 days, the Earth makes a full loop around the Sun. You probably learned this in elementary school. As we fly past the Sun, the Earth also spins fully around like a top once every 24 hours. Wherever we are on the Earth, when we're facing the Sun, it's day. When we're not, it's night. You get it. The Moon travels around the Earth as we go, once every 30 days or so. All the planets, including Earth, are more or less arranged on a flat plane around the Sun. It sort of looks like marbles on a turntable. This plane is called the ecliptic. From our perspective here on Earth, the Sun, Moon, and all the planets move across our sky on roughly the same path. It's the ecliptic. All of the planets travel around the Sun at different speeds. For some planets, like Mercury, they get around the sun really fast. For others, like Jupiter, it takes them many of our years to make the trip. All of the planets and their moons, including Earth and our moon, the sun, some asteroids, and a few comets, are part of a neighborhood gang called the solar system. The solar system is basically everything that's captured by the gravity of our sun. All of the stars that we see are outside of our solar system, and they aren't just a little outside of it. They're way outside of it. If you could travel at the speed of light, which is really fast, 186,000 miles per second actually, it would take you years to get to another star. Depending on which star you picked, it might take you millions of years to get there, at the speed of light. The universe is so large we can't really get our head around its size. All of the stars in the sky are faraway suns, and they're all moving through space on their own, just really far away. So here's the part we have to try to understand. From our perspective, spinning around and hurtling through space, the planets and the stars all appear to move around us, but they don't. Very simply put, it's us moving, but it gives us the illusion that the sun and the stars move around the Earth. The moon really does move around us, but not as fast as it looks. And we move around the sun throughout the year. And whenever we move, we get a different perspective of the stars. Throughout history, people have kept track of what time of year it is by what stars and constellations they can see in the sky. A constellation is a group of stars we've made pictures out of. It's like looking at a cloud and seeing a car, or an elephant, or a rhinoceros or something. Ancient people played connect the dots with the stars. One looked like a bear to someone, and another a lion. People love to see and make images out of stuff like that, and God made us that way. More on that to come. Again, as the Earth travels around the sun, from our perspective, the sun and the other planets pass through different groups of stars, or constellations. You may have heard of the zodiac. And relax, we still aren't going to slide into astrology. The zodiac is simply the group of constellations the sun passes through during the year, the ones on the ecliptic. Astrologers have hijacked it to say that the constellations and the planets moving past those constellations have some power over us. I said it before, but to be clear, we don't believe that. The stars, planets, and zodiac stuff don't hold any power over anything. They're just numbers on a watch face, hands on a cosmic clock. Ancient peoples could look up and tell if it was April or September based on what constellations they saw in the sky. Okay, you're doing great. Let's cover one more important thing before we actually move on to God's story in the stars. People have made connect-the-dot images out of the stars for as long as they've been looking at the night sky, and they all have some sort of ancient mythology attached to them, stories made up to go along with the pictures that they see. Different ancient cultures had slightly different stories about them, but for the most part, amazingly, the groups of stars and the myths associated with them are pretty similar, but not always. Today in the West, we have a fairly standardized catalog of what the myths behind constellations are, but that didn't happen until the 2nd century AD in most cases, and for some of them it was as late as the 1800s. The ancient stories and the myths of these constellations are going to play a major part in our sky story, not because we believe in mythology, but because the stories handed down across thousands of years of human history have created a common understanding of the sky. It gives us an understanding of ancient people and a common language with them that's largely unchanged since ancient times. It allows us to understand what they thought as they examined the sky. Again, we don't believe in the myths. I'll say it again if I have to. We do not believe in mythology. Cool. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's finally take a look at the story in the sky. Welcome to the universe. Some of us will never see the sky like this. Most of us live in cities, and the light pollution makes it next to impossible to see any stars at all, much less as many stars as we see here. But trust me, they're up there. There are more than we can count. I'm using software to show the stars, but you can see all of this in a dark place in the countryside, with or without a telescope. If you get a chance, and you've never done so, I encourage you to make a special trip to look at the stars on a clear night. It will take your breath away. Ancient people didn't have to deal with the light pollution we have today, so every clear evening, the stars were visible for everyone to see. It was a part of life for them. It's really too bad that most of us don't get that opportunity today. Here are the constellations. I have their name tags on and lines that make them easier to identify. The lines obviously aren't there in the actual sky, they're just an aid to us. This line here is the ecliptic that we talked about. Remember, this is the line across the sky that the sun, moon, and planets all follow from our perspective. After 12 months, or 365 days, we make a giant loop around the sky and end up back where we started. It's like a NASCAR track. One big loop. There are lots of constellations in the sky, but for our purposes, we're going to be looking at the ones most near the ecliptic line. Let's start here. This is Virgo, also called the woman or the virgin. Here are her legs and arms. And let's say her head is up here. She's sort of laying on her side. Above her head is Leo, the lion. Below her feet, down here, is Libra. And below Libra is Scorpius. This may sound familiar to you. If that's the case, it might be because the Bible talks about this part of the sky in the book of Revelation. Let's see what it says. Here's Revelation chapter 12. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains, in the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1260 days. There's that word sign again at the beginning. There's a lot to unpack theologically from this passage, and we'll get into that in another video. But for now, let's just take a surface look at it. For reference, the woman symbolically is Israel, as we see clearly in verse 5. Israel already gave birth to her Messiah, Jesus, but it helps us identify her in the story. Additionally, Israel is referred to as a woman groaning in the labor of childbirth, longing to be delivered from her enemies by her Messiah in the Old Testament. It's in Micah 5:3 and Isaiah 26:17. So we see multiple symbolic references to Israel here. We have the sun and the moon and the 12 stars, which are also references to Joseph's dream in Genesis 37:9. Revelation 12 is, in part, a symbolic account of God's work at the end of the age. But I think it's more than just that. So John, the author of Revelation, sees these things in heaven. The word literally means the sky. It's a woman clothed in the sun with the moon at her feet and 12 stars crowning her head. These things hold biblical symbolic significance. But I think John is also actually seeing something in the sky. If we look carefully, we see, interestingly, that John is telling us not only where to look in the sky, but when. I'll show you what I mean. We know now from our astronomy crash course that the sun and the moon travel on the ecliptic across the sky. So we know that we're looking for something along that path, because the sun and the moon are locked to it. As it turns out, Virgo is the only constellation that represents a woman on that path. So she seems like a good candidate. Let's see what else it says. She's clothed in the sun, and the moon is under or at her feet. Okay, let's see how that looks. We can see that the sun moves along the ecliptic line all the time. As the months roll past, the sun passes through different constellations on that line. And sure enough, here comes Virgo. Interestingly, there's an annular solar eclipse on October 2nd, 2024, the year this is being recorded, as the sun approaches Virgo. It's only visible in the Pacific Ocean and southern South America, but it's there. As you can see, the sun is going to clothe the woman in its brilliance. And here comes the moon. It's sort of hard to see because it's a new moon, meaning it's dark to us. But here the moon comes resting at the woman's feet. Depending on where you are on Earth, this is going to be sometime on October 4th, 2024. As it turns out, the sun and the moon don't always line up this way in this constellation, so it's special. She's clothed in the sun with the moon under her feet. This doesn't last very long, by the way. This is a very short period of time, and it only happens here in the sky during the Jewish fall holidays. These holidays are the holiest days of the year to the Jews. John is telling us where and when to look. What else does John tell us? She has a crown of 12 stars at her head. Let's look. Above her head, here, is Leo. And these little guys here, Comet Berenices, or the tuft of the tail, were considered a part of the constellation Leo in John's day. So let's count how many stars are there. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So we've got the woman, the sun and the moon and the stars. I mentioned the date for this as October 4th, 2024. This is the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets. This is the first day of the Jewish New Year, and it's an important day to them. But the sun and the moon do this in Virgo from time to time, and it's always at the Jewish holidays. So it seems to me for us to pay attention to it, we need to see something out of the ordinary, when and where John tells us to look. Now you may see this weird thing over here. This is a comet, and it's a main character in the story. Let's see what it does. As we move forward in time, we see this comet with the endearing name Shuchen-Shan Atlas, or, as it's probably more commonly known, C2023A3, come to rest in the woman's stomach, like she's pregnant. Looking again at Revelation 12, we see in verse 2 that the woman is pregnant and crying out in birth pains, in the agony of giving birth. It looks like the woman is pregnant with the comet to me. One bit of info you might be interested in. This comet was only discovered in 2023, so astronomers are still looking at it to confirm, but it looks like it only comes around once every 80,000 years or so. Or it might only come around once every million years or so. It depends on who you ask. It's brand new to us, so they're still working it out. It's also possible that the comet will be flung out of the solar system as it passes the Earth, never to return. It might also burn up as it nears the Earth. Either way, this is extraordinarily rare, possibly a once-in-history event, and the chances of it being where John tells us to look, when he tells us to look, doing what he describes, are almost impossible. By our basic math, it's on the order of 1 in 10 to the 26th chance of being coincidence. That's 10 with about 26 zeros after it. Let's look at one more interesting biblical reference that might apply to this before we move on. This one's important to the Jews. Let's look at Numbers. This is from a prophecy by Balaam, of talking donkey fame. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab, and break down all the sons of Sheth. Edom shall be dispossessed. Seir also, his enemies, shall be dispossessed. Israel is doing valiantly, and one from Jacob shall exercise dominion and destroy the survivors of cities. Scary. This is another prophecy of the Messiah. It's interesting that it associates him with a star rising out of Jacob. If you recall the story, Israel is the name God gives Jacob after they wrestle in the desert, and God knocks his hip out of place. So Jacob is Israel. The star is rising out of Israel, as the following line says. We remember in chapter 12 of Revelation that the woman Virgo also represents Israel. So two references to Israel and stars, one here in Numbers, and the other in Revelation 12. If I've missed any, leave me a note in the comments. There's more to John's account in Revelation chapter 12. Let's take a look at it again. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on its head 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. So John sees another sign in the sky, a red dragon with heads and horns, and a tail sweeping stars from the sky. He's waiting to eat the woman's child. Let's see what the sky shows. If you remember, earlier we saw that Scorpius is one of the constellations in this area. Scorpius is often thought of as a scorpion, obviously, but is sometimes seen as a dragon or a serpent. Its main star is Antares, and it's a red star. Okay, sounds good so far. Let's talk about heads and horns for a second. The prophet Daniel in his book, and John writing in other parts of Revelation, namely chapters 13 and 17, both describe a nation that will arise to persecute Israel in the last days. That nation is recorded in both books as having 10 horns. John, in Revelation 13 and 17, records the nation as having 7 heads and 10 horns. For our purposes, let's suffice it to say that this multi-headed dragon with multiple horns and crowns is tied to Satan in his eventual war on Israel. This plays out in the following verses of chapter 12. Okay, back to the sky. We see Scorpius in his red eye. He's down here below the woman's feet, like the text says. Let's look for heads, tails, and crowns. Scorpius has several heads, depending on how you draw the constellation, and its tail curls right around through the Milky Way, here. To the naked eye, the Milky Way appears to take up about a third of the night sky. The Milky Way looks different from the rest of the sky, and it could potentially look like the tail gathered stars and flung them across the sky. Looking like a candidate so far. Above Scorpius' head, we have Libra. With the naked eye, Libra appears to have 7 stars, so 7 crowns on its heads. In my mind, we found our dragon. He's waiting to devour the woman's child as soon as it's born. Let's see what happens next in the story. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1260 days. So the woman gives birth to her child, but the child is swept up into heaven. Let's take a look at the comet again. A few days after it enters the woman's abdomen, on Yom Kippur, the most holy day of the year for Jews, the Day of Atonement, the child comet is born, and over the next few days flies up to heaven, straight to the constellation Ophiuchus. That constellation is important, but we'll save that for next time. For now, let's say that everything above the ecliptic line is sky, or heaven. So the child or comet flies up to heaven. As for the woman fleeing into the wilderness, this continues on in the narrative later. We'll come back to that in another episode. So to sum it all up, we found the woman in the sky when and where John told us to look. We found the dragon right where he ought to be. And we found something totally unexpected, a comet that the woman gives birth to, and it flies right up to heaven. What does all of this mean? Well, we'll look into this more closely in a coming video, but John includes this in his book for a reason. Will we know what it means before the fact? That's a hard question to answer. Maybe, maybe not. These events we're talking about in the sky may not be significant beyond their interesting correlation to the story in Revelation. They may not mean anything. Still, it bears remembering that when this comet arrives in October of this year, 2024, we will see a once-in-history event. It will occur where John tells us to look, when John tells us to look, doing what John describes. I think a safe place to land for now is knowing that these things are happening in the sky, and we should pay attention, but try not to read too much into them. Only time will tell if they're significant. There's no shortcut for that. Whatever happens, I think we ought to take a second just to step back and consider what we're looking at. The universe is a literal miracle. Aside from the incomprehensible event that was creation, the dance it performs as it hurtles, spins, and twirls through space is exact to the point of being virtually impossible. It shouldn't exist in the first place, and it should all come undone at every moment. Yet there it is up in the sky for us to see every night. The God of creation brought it into existence, and He holds it together moment by moment. Add that to the fact that He tells us He communicates with us through the signs in the heavens, and we should be dumbfounded. He's created a cosmic system that is more accurate and steady and predictable than a clock. If we take that to its logical conclusion, this means that from the moment God flung the stars into space, He had planned how they would align at some later date to communicate His purposes to us. How great is the Lord! How unsearchable are His ways! And the heavens declare His glory. So wrapping this up, this is just a surface overview of all these things, and there's a lot of theological material to consider that we're not even touching on here. But it's a start. There's a lot more to show you in the coming episodes, so please subscribe to us and stay in the know. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, please hit the like button. Next time we'll see more of the story in the sky. There's a lot more to see. Thanks for watching. See you next time.